Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a genuinely fascinating academic paper that completely rethinks how we understand modern workplace burnout. Now, if you've ever felt like the actual day-to-day experience of doing your job just doesn't quite match up with those pristine organizational charts and the shiny core value statements plastered all over the office walls, well, this one is absolutely for you. We're looking at a 2026 paper titled Answerable Management. What's really cool about this paper is that it brilliantly synthesizes classical organization theory with feminist performance and affect theory, which is essentially the study of human emotions and our very messy lived realities.
So let's just jump right in with a question that I know has probably crossed your mind during a particularly stressful work week. Why are we all so burned out when companies claim to care more than ever about culture? I mean, modern organizations talk constantly about empathy, inclusion, and psychological safety, right? Yet the lived reality for so many workers is just utter exhaustion. The paper argues that this isn't simply a failure of individual resilience, and it's not just a few bad apples in leadership, it's actually a massive, baked-in structural contradiction.
To put that into perspective, the World Health Organization literally classifies chronic workplace stress as an occupational phenomenon, and the data completely backs it up. Gallup's 2024 global reporting highlights that a staggering 41% of employees experience a lot of stress. So we clearly have a structural crisis on our hands. This is not just a wellness issue, it's a fundamental organizational design issue. People burn out when the demands of their roles and the actual authority they have to execute those roles are just wildly out of sync. Which brings us to Section 1, the modern management crisis, contradiction by design. Let's look at why the modern manager is basically set up to fail. Do you know, we often design jobs for this abstract, almost robotic worker who supposedly has no outside life or messy emotions. But the lived reality? It requires holding impossible contradictions. For example, think about a modern middle manager. They're told to enforce strict financial discipline and slash budgets, while simultaneously being told to guarantee psychological safety and deeply care for their team. It's essentially asking managers to launder the organization's structural problems into motivational speeches. And that role conflict isn't just stressful. It's a fundamental crisis in how we structure authority.
To really understand how we got here, we need to look at the foundations. Section 2, Organization Theory's Blind Spots.
Think about classic frameworks. Frederick Taylor's scientific management gave us legibility and hard metrics, and Max Weber gave us predictable bureaucracy. But here's the catch. They left a massive blind spot when it comes to the actual emotional work required to preserve cooperation. Weber's bureaucracy performs what feminist theory calls a false neutrality. When a decision comes down from the top as simply company policy or process, it appears entirely depersonalized, right? But that hides the fact that these supposedly neutral systems completely miss the realities of care, embodiment, and all that messy human friction that is absolutely required to keep an organization running.
So the real crucial point here is that when leaders make decisions from what feels like a purely rational view from nowhere, we have to stop and ask whose pain actually becomes data. Administrative rationality isn't just cognitive, it's deeply effective and political. Think about it. Who gets interpreted as emotional rather than objective? Who constantly has to translate their lived experience into the institution's rigid corporate language before an HR department can even hear them?
And that brings us to a major paradigm shift, Section 3, the Feminist Management Lens, where we map out the missing half of the workplace.
Let's build out our vocabulary a bit, starting with Arlie Hochschild's concept of emotional labor. This completely reshapes how we view middle management. Managers aren't just out there assigning tasks. They act as an emotional translation layer. They are forced to take a corporate contradiction, like, say, calling severe under-resourcing agility, and perform emotional laundering so the team can actually swallow it. That forced, managed feeling, that is legitimate, exhausting work, but you'll notice it never actually shows up on a balance sheet.
Next up, we have Lauren Berlant's idea of cruel optimism.
This is such a fascinating concept because it captures exactly why high discretionary effort isn't always healthy. Think about those organizations that proudly call themselves a family or promise you'll have this immense world-changing impact. Employees attach themselves to that mission, and sure, it sustains them for a while, but it also extracts way more from them than is fair or just. Passion becomes a severe risk factor when it makes refusing unsafe or excessive work feel like you're personally betraying the mission.
Okay, this next one is absolutely wild. It's Madeline Claire Elish's concept of the moral crumple zone. Think about a car. The
the crumple zone absorbs the impact of a crash to protect the rest of the vehicle. Well, in business, frontline managers act as human crumple zones. This is exactly why they burn out so quickly. They are held fully accountable for team engagement, retention, and culture, but they don't actually have the structural authority, the budget, or the power to fix the root causes of any of those problems. The responsibility just collapses onto them, even though the system made meaningful control totally impossible.
And finally, we have Donna Haraway's concept of situated knowledge. Basically, this demands that whenever we're looking at some pristine, greenlit management dashboard, we have to ask very specific questions. Who is missing from this data? Whose exhausting, invisible coordination labor just isn't being counted? And critically, when you're looking at engagement surveys, who cannot safely answer without fear of retaliation? True objectivity isn't a view from nowhere. It requires us to understand exactly where the data is coming from and who it might be silencing.
All right, so we've defined the problem. What's the solution? Let's move to Section 4, the Answerable Framework and its 6 core requirements. The Answerable Management Framework gives us 6 precise rules to evaluate whether an organization is truly functional, rather than just performing management through empty rituals. They are chronicle before culture, role before charisma, scene before metric, affect before engagement, refusal before loyalty, and responsibility before delegation. Let's zoom in on a couple of these to see how powerful they are in practice. Take chronicle before culture, for example. Before an organization gets to pat itself on the back for an inclusive culture that's written on a break room poster, this framework demands a chronicle of actual events. What repeatedly happens? Who is actually penalized for making a complaint? Who is forced to absorb all the last-minute, late-night urgency? And who gets promoted after a massive failure? If the Daily Chronicle contradicts the culture statement, then the culture statement is literally just an empty ceremony. Then there's refusal before loyalty. This is a big one. Healthy organizations absolutely require legitimate ways to say no. If employees cannot safely push back on impossible timelines, unsafe conditions, or unethical work without facing retaliation, then their loyalty isn't real. Loyalty without the capacity for legitimate refusal isn't actually commitment, it's organizational capture. It is just compliance produced through fear. So how do we actually apply this in the real world? Section 5, redesigning the workplace to fix burnout. Look, if we really want to fix burnout, we have to stop putting it all on individual resilience. We need to start treating diversity, inclusion, and psychological safety as structural organizational design. This means evaluating the whole system when a failure happens, not just pointing the finger at the closest human crumple zone. It means taking standard engagement surveys and pairing them with affective risk audits, which means actually checking the emotional toll on the workforce. You're asking not just if people are engaged, but if they are terrified, exhausted, or just performing toxic positivity to survive. And it means tying culture work directly to complaint and repair, creating an environment where a corporate value statement actually gives an employee the real power to contest a bad decision. It all really boils down to this fantastic quote from the author. Organizations are performed, felt, and answered for. We have to stop mistaking disembodied charts, agile rituals, and automated performance systems for the real organization. A good manager is not just some charismatic hero absorbing all the company's contradictions. A truly good organization is one where performances are witnessed, where complaints can actually alter the power dynamics, where refusals are safe, and where responsibilities are attached to real structural power. So, I'm going to leave you with a question to chew on regarding your own workplace. Do you have power in your role or just responsibility? Are you maybe acting as a moral crumple zone for an unaccountable system? I'd really encourage you to evaluate your team and your company, not just by its polished metrics, but by the raw emotional reality that actually produces those numbers. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this gives you a completely new lens through which to view your workday.